This sermon is from the series Psalms, God's Songbook for All Seasons. It contains sermons preached at Crossway Church over a number of years.
When a ship drops an anchor, the anchor doesn't hold by its weight. It actually has those hooks for a reason that kind of bites in. And so depending on what it bites into depends on how strong and whether or not it will hold. There's a phenomenon called anchor drag where literally it doesn't get the bite and it will drag. And you aren't actually set in anchor. The tricky thing about this, and this is why especially in the olden times when they were trying to figure this stuff out, they would have a night watchman. It wasn't necessarily for pirates, although maybe that was it, but it was also just to make sure that the ship actually stayed where it was supposed to stay. And they would actually get 2 points on either side of it and make sure that they were in line and make sure that they were still in line, because it's hard to tell. When the waters are fine, it's hard to tell that you're slowly moving because the current does what the current does, and you can feel that kind of jostling around, and it's easy for you to miss that you're drifting, that the anchor actually hadn't taken grip. Now, when a storm hits, that's a different story. You know whether your anchor is secure or not. And in fact, in the winter of 1703, there's a storm that's called the Great Storm at Britain, and in it, there were a number of British Navy ships and merchant ships that were on trying to circumvent the French in the middle of a war, and they went into this harbor off the coast of Kent called the Downs, and they knew that this was supposed to be a safe harbor, but there were some treacherous sands, the Goodwin sands, and they put anchor in. And then all of a sudden, the worst storm of British history, you know when it's labeled the Great Storm of 1703, it ain't good, right? I mean, let's just be honest. We don't say the beautiful storm, it's the Great Storm. And literally, I think it took out half the fleet of British Navy and many merchant ships as well. And the whole reason is because their anchors didn't sit, and they were washed to these sand dunes and taken away. They were supposed to be in a harbor of refuge. They were exactly where they were supposed to go, but what they thought was going to give them safety and protection didn't accomplish that. Well, I start my sermon this morning because the reality is we can do the same thing. We all have certain things that we kind of bank or anchor our life to. Sometimes they're good things. It could be a good job, it could be a good family or good relationships, it could be good health. And those things in themselves aren't necessarily bad, but if that's the thing that we think is going to hold our life through the many different storms, what we'll quickly realize is that they aren't as secure as what they think, and when the storms do hit, our life kind of shifts and shakes, and there's potential for damage there. And so the question that we're going to look at this morning is, what are we ultimately anchored to? What is the thing that is steady in all of it? That's the question that's behind our psalm. So today we are looking at Psalm 46. Here at Crossway, we just preached through a book. We are preaching through the Psalms where we left off. We're kind of making our way through it. And so we find ourselves in Psalm 46, and we will read all 11 verses. This is the word of the Lord. For the director of music of the sons of Korah, according to Alamoth the song, God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the sea, though the waters roar and the foam and the mountains quake with their surging. Now, your Bibles, if you're using the NIV, may not have it. There's a footnote, but it says Selah, which is just rest. And it actually is breaking up some stanzas in this psalm. And there's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her, and she will not fail. God will help her at the break of day. Nations are in uproar, kingdoms fail. He lifts his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he's brought on the earth. He makes the wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bows and shatters the spears. He turns the shields with fire, and he says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Selah. Now, the Downs was a refuge. It was a place where you ran to and you moved to, that harbor in which those ships went in the great storm of 1703. They were in a spot where they thought they were going to be secure, but when the storm hits, they found out that it wasn't as secure as what they think. And this psalm, especially in this first stanza, reminds us that life isn't as steady as what we think, and it can actually shake us more than what we realize. And for some of us, this may seem like a little bit of a depressing tone. For others of us, it may just seem like it's the reality. I mean, listen to the prayer request that we had today. We know that bad things happen, and we know that it can hit us. Whether it's our friends and loved ones or whether it's in our own life, that damage can come, and when it does, it can have a huge impact on our lives. And what we see here, though, is that even when that happens, if we are anchored in the right spot and in the right thing, then we can have hope. And we know there's hope because God is at work. And so in the first stanza, what we see is that when our physical world shatters, God is our stronghold. Now, the psalm actually does one thing. It lists what God is at first, and then it lists what's going to come, the trouble that's going to come. But I want to look at it in the reverse as we look at this. And the reality is this psalm is very honest, and it says that we live in a fallen world where physical calamity strikes. It says it right there in verse 2 and 3. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the sea, heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam. Now, in ancient world, if there's one thing that was immovable, it's a mountain. You know, every time I drive up 503, I see Mount St. Helens, and it's missing something. The top. I didn't live here in the 80s. But you who did know that mountains aren't as secure as what we think. But in ancient times, it said that if there was something immovable, it was a mountain. And I want you to see how great the devastation is that he describes. Because the one immovable thing is actually being swept up by the sea. And it says that the reality is that can happen. These physical things that we put our hope and trust in, those things that we think are so beyond, that are like Fort Knox and nothing can get at them or nothing can destroy it, is actually destructible. And it uses this language of the sea, which is known as evil and chaos, and it overcomes this mountain. And so I want you to see that he's just honest, that we live in a world where physical calamity can strike, and he uses that as an illustration. I think the reality is that our lives can often seem like they can crumble, right? I mean, for some of us, it's our health. We feel it. We are going to the doctors more than we care to ever want to. Maybe we're feeling the effects of our age. Our memory is fading, or we're feeling weak. Our bodies can crumble. Maybe some of us are facing with a new diagnosis, and it's hard. Also, our finances can crumble, you know? I mean, we can get a layoff that we didn't see coming, or a car breaks down, or the reality is inflation hits, and guess what? Everything costs more than what it used to. Sometimes even our success can crumble. We think that we're going to move in this direction, a job or a house or a degree, and this thing that we thought was going to bring ultimate pleasure, actually we have it, and we're left wondering, like, is this really all there is? We sense that maybe life isn't as complete as it used to be, and it seems more insignificant or crumbly than what we originally thought. And so I want you to think about your own life. When have you experienced life giving way, and where did you first go? As I said, we tend to all anchor our lives in something. For some of us, it can be, we feel secure if our bank account is big enough, or we feel secure if our relationships are conflict-free enough, or we feel good as long as we feel successful, or people have us in high esteem. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways that we can look at those kind of things. Those things that if that happens, we feel like life can be okay. But when the storms hit and those things are threatened, then we're in a different spot, and our lifeboat is gently shifting away, and danger can come. That's why the psalmist in the very beginning reminds us that we need to anchor our hope into something. We need to anchor our hope ultimately in God himself. And he reminds us that God is our refuge and our strength. Now, Many of you know that 2 years ago, my family and I, when we were on sabbatical, got to go to Greece and Turkey. Thank you, Lilly Foundation, for that, by the way, and for you guys to give us that opportunity. Um, every ancient city that we went to usually had the city down below, and it had this fortress up above. And that fortress was the refuge where they went to. It was walled, and they would, when the enemy struck, they would run up the hill and they would go hide out in the most safe place they could be because they could attack them from behind. And what this psalmist says is that God is that place. He is stronger than any city with fortress that's on top of a hill that seems impenetrable. He is our refuge, but he also says that he is our strength. You know, when we feel weak, we need to be reminded of that because we feel like we don't have enough strength to get through the situations that we have. And this is what the psalmist says. God is that thing that we can anchor to. He's our refuge, but he can also, through the power of his Spirit, give us the strength that we need. And I want you to see that it also says that he's an ever-present help in trouble. I mean, what it really means is that it can be found greatly. That's how it's literally translated. In other words, it's an intensifying image there. What he wants us to see that when we're in trouble, that God is there. He's there, and we can run to him. We don't have to fear that he's not going to be there, that he's just there. He's ever present and can be at work in our lives. Now, I understand that it doesn't always feel that way, but just because something doesn't feel that way doesn't mean that he's not there. But I want you to see that the psalmist says this, and he does this at this point, because I think reminding us of this truth that God is our refuge and our strength accomplishes two things. First, it reminds us that our steadiness isn't something we generate when the shaking starts. You know, sometimes when the shaking starts, we feel like we need to just do whatever we can to take care of it. And he's reminding us that when we're in that moment, we need to run or we need to put our anchor to God and we need to turn our focus and our attention there. And so if we're in the middle of the storm, it reminds us where our true hope and our true help comes from. Second, though, if we're not in that spot, it just reminds us of that truth. So that when we face it, and unfortunately the word when is the key one there, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, we know where to turn to. He kind of prepares us for this, and he does this. So when our circumstances drift, we need to realize that God is the anchor that cannot move. He is our refuge and our strength. In the second stanza, verses 4-7, we see something else, a calamity. When our nation is in uproar, God is present. Again, the psalmist says the same thing. He lays out what God is and what's going to give us hope, and then lays out the issue. But we see that the issue is very clear. The nations are at war. The nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. Now, I don't know about you, but like sometimes I forget how chaotic and the calamity and conflicts that are going on in our world. I mean, I thought about just in the last 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years, how many times people have asked me if I thought World War III is going to start. I mean, you've got Russia fighting Ukraine. You got Israel going after Gaza. You have now the U.S. going into Iran. If there's a time where it feels like the nations are at war, it's happening, and sometimes we can forget that. And what he is saying is, this is part of life. Nations will rise and nations will war. But when that happens, where do we turn our focus and attention? What is it that will give us peace and hope in the midst of all of this? He's going to give us the answer in a minute. But I think I want to turn this to ourselves personally as well. What are those personal relational wars that you're going through? Sometimes it's easy to think about it on the national level, but the fact of the matter is we have conflict in our own lives. We may have a family in crisis, a marriage that's in a rough spot, or kids that don't get along. It may be that our coworkers are treating us badly, or you see battles going on there. Maybe students and our friends at school, they just are being downright nasty to each other, and you see that conflict. Conflict can enter the church. There can be people who disagree. But when that conflict happens, where do we go and what do we turn to? And so I want you to think about that. What is the conflict in your life? Maybe you can say it's these national ones, man. It's the Iran war. It is Israel. It is Ukraine. And let's not forget all the conflicts happening in Africa where there's unfortunately genocide. I mean, we have too many wars, quite frankly, and we lose sight of them. But where are we going to turn to in the midst of all of this? What are we going to turn to? Well, the psalmist again reminds us that our strength and our sense of strength, the thing that we need to anchor to, is a reminder that God is present with us. He says it right there. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the high dwells. I want you to notice something, though, and that is that the raging seas are now replaced by a very calm and gentle, serene river. And what he says here is that the river is going through the city of God. The focus now is not on the mountains, the impenetrable thing, but it is the place where God is present, and that is the city of Jerusalem. The one thing that you need to note, though, is that Jerusalem, unlike many of the other ancient cities, think of all the cities like Thebes and Memphis on the Nile, Nineveh on the Tigris, or Babylon on the Euphrates, actually isn't on a river at all. So he can't be talking about a physical river because guess what? There isn't one. They use a spring. And that's because he wants to remind the people that a river has a bigger connotation to it, and that is, throughout the Old Testament, we will see that oftentimes a river is a biblical symbol of God's refreshing presence. We see it actually in the garden in Genesis 2, where there's a river going through it when everything is the way it's originally supposed to be. And we see it prophesied in Ezekiel 47, verse 1, where he gets this vision and he sees, what does he see? It's a temple, the presence of God, and water flowing from it. Now, I'd be thinking, what's going on? There's a flood there. But the image that he is having is the presence of God is pouring out to everyone around it. And that's the metaphor that he wants us to see. That this raging sea that everyone thought was evil and that overtook the mountain is not still, the waters are under the control of God. And a matter of fact, that river is this beautiful vision of the new life that can come from the presence of God. I mean, Steph grew up in central Washington, and you can see where there are canals and water flowing, and you can see where there is not. One side is brown, the other is green, and it can literally be right across the road. That's the impact that the water can have. And what we see is, this is what he says, that the reason why the people have hope, even though the nations are at war, is because God is present with them. And in case we miss the temple or the river symbolism, he just outright says it. The river is a stream whose make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. Jerusalem was the place where the temple resided, and the Holy of Holies is the innermost part of that temple that only the priest could go to once or twice because the presence of God was there. And so when the psalmist cries out and says, there is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwell, what he's crying out to is that this, even though the nations may uproar and there may be relational strife, and you may wonder who is going to win and what is going to happen, God is there, and in this case, the city will not fail. That's what he says. He says, there is hope because God is there, and God will help her at her break of day. Now, the within her is the thing that we see. God's presence is the thing that gives them hope. And the other thing that you'll notice there is that the daybreak is going to happen. Oftentimes when we are in the midst of difficult situations, when the chaos of life feels overwhelming in the storm, all we see is the darkness, and we think that that's all life is going to be. But the psalmist says right here that God is with you, and there will be a break of day. This darkness and this night will maybe subside. Now, I think what's interesting is many people actually attribute this psalm on two different occasions that they can come to mind. The first one is 2 Kings 19, verse 19 and 20. It's also in Chronicles. And in that one, Hezekiah is the king of Jerusalem. Now, if you know anything about the kings of Israel and Jerusalem and Judah, there aren't that many great ones, but Hezekiah was one of the good ones. And there was literally 180,000 Assyrian army all around Jerusalem, and they are sieging him. And the king, Sennacherib, is literally taunting them. It's known that he was known to literally put in flyers. You know, they're not paper flyers or emails anymore, but they were actually stone tablets that he would send into the city and smuggle into the city, and it would depict and describe everything that they were going to do to it. And they were brutal. Crucifixion, they would put poles in the middle of people. They would torture them. They would do everything. And he was taunting them, saying, there's no way that you can survive. I have 180,000 soldiers around you. You are toast. But Hezekiah actually encouraged the people to cry out to the God and to look to them for help. And they went to bed under siege and woke up to a field of dead soldiers. Nobody in Jerusalem swung a sword. God moved. If that wasn't crazy enough, there's another story that's almost similar to it in 2 Chronicles 20. And that one actually, by the way, is actually attested that there's this destruction in different places. But in 2 Chronicles 20, Jehoshaphat has 3 armies coming after him: Moab, Ammon, and the Midianites. And they're marching on Judah. And again, he has nothing to do. He can't fight them. And so what he does is he cries out and encourages again the people to turn to the Lord. And he says, hey, listen, because there's prophets in both of these situations who told them that God was going to work. He says in 2 Chronicles 20:17, you will not have to fight this battle. Take up your position, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you. And again, this time the armies turned on themselves, and they were free, and they didn't do anything. And so what they want to see, and what you see the psalmist saying is, life can seem bleak. Life can seem bleak. But when we have God present in our lives, it doesn't mean that the darkness will overcome. Now, I wish I could say that every one of us gets these amazing stories and get to experience them. Life doesn't always go that way. But the reality is it doesn't mean that God can't move. And that's the point that the psalmist is trying to make. And this is what he's saying is, these circumstances don't have to move us because the Lord Almighty is with us. If you notice, both verse 7 and verse 11, each stanza, the second and the third, end with the same refrain. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And so what we see here is when we face the storms and when our circumstances drift, we need to remember that God is present with us, and he is our refuge and strength. He is the anchor that will guide us and help us get through this thing because he is with us. Again, it doesn't always feel that way, but just because it doesn't feel that way doesn't mean that that isn't what is at play. The third stanza takes a little bit of a different focus, though. It doesn't actually give a circumstance. It actually instead calls us to 2 things. It calls us to see what God has done, which stills our striving. So I think it's important for us to see that this third stanza says that seeing what God has done stills our striving. You can see the verse that everybody knows right off the bat, Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. That is the key verse there. But if you see before that, you're actually called to see something different. And that is to come and see what God has done. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolation he's brought forth on the earth. He makes war cease, he ends the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Now, you know what's interesting is the sons of Korah, who is listed as the writers of this psalm, they're actually brought up in 2 Corinthians 19 as leading the congregation in worship before God moves. I want you to think what it would have been like for either of those groups to be in this state of completely being fearful and overwhelmed and an enemy coming at them, and where they thought there was absolutely no hope, and then the next day they look outside their city walls and they see that this thing that had been dealt with, that this thing that they had feared had been dealt with, and it was completely eradicated. Don't you think they'd come and tell everybody, come and see what the Lord has done? And that is what the people are encouraging, the psalmist is encouraging them to do. Remember those times when God has done things for you. Tell other people about it so that they can have hope. Again, not a false hope where it means that God's going to move that way all the time, but a reminder that God can move that way. And sometimes that's the hope that we need. So the first command is that we come and see what God has done. And I encourage us to think about those. Think about those times. When has God been at work and where has he done things in our lives that we didn't expect? Maybe it's that he's repaired a relationship or he provided for us. Maybe it's even just that even though it didn't go the way that it wanted to, we didn't get that job, that we see that that's not actually what we were meant to be. And even though it was a really hard thing, we saw where he guided us and directed us. And ultimately, it was, as we sang in that song earlier, it was for his glory and our good. But there's a second command in there, and it is stop striving and trust God. Now, I don't know about you, but Psalm 46:10, when I read it, be still and know that I am God, usually in my mind, it's like, you think of like, okay, I need to be still and meditate, and I need to think about this. That's not a bad thing to do, but the verb actually says, stop doing anything. It means cease, let go, drop it, stop. I don't know how many of you have seen the Bob Newhart commercial where he tells somebody, stop it. That's his psychology advice. That's kind of what this psalm says. Stop it and know that I am God. It's, yes, stop it can mean that we slow down and we reflect. But part of what it means is we need to stop frantically trying to do everything on our own, try and keep all these things from happening and trying to do what we can to prevent stuff. It doesn't mean that we don't do stuff, but it also doesn't mean that we think that we can control everything. And if we do everything right, then God won't, and if we don't do everything right, then God won't work. What he says is slow down, stop, quit trying to figure everything out. And trust God. But I want you to see that trusting God starts by stopping and letting God work. It also starts with knowing God. Like, I don't know if God's trustworthy if I don't actually think about who he is and what his character is. That he's got this unfailing, unconditional love that he's going to show me. That he can use ultimately even the bad things in my life for his good. And we need to stop and let that sink into our hearts. And we need to stop and know this and remind ourselves that he is that refuge and he is that presence. And that is what gives us hope. And so there's two commands. Come and see what God has done. Remind ourselves of what God has done in our own lives and stop striving. Stop trying to do everything on our own power and our own might and just get it figured out. Stop it. And trust. Trust. And that trust comes from knowing God. And the psalmist again ends with that word of praise, and that is that God will have the last word. Be still and know that I am God. And by the way, this is God who's saying this to us, not the psalmist. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. It may seem like darkness wins. It may seem like chaos is going to overcome, but I get the last word. I will be the only one left standing. That's why you need to anchor into me. And the reason is because I am the Lord Almighty. I am the Lord over everything, the hosts of hosts, everything in heaven and on earth. And I am the God of Jacob. I am that fortress, that refuge of strength. And this is how the psalm ends. I want us to see, though, that Christ fulfills what this psalm promises. We can stop our striving because Christ has already won. I love 1 Corinthians 15, verse 57. It says, but thanks be to God who gives us victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Now, we're in the in-between time. Christ has defeated sin and death. It showed that on the cross when he rose again from the dead, but he hasn't come back again to create everything new, and so we're in that in-between. But we know that he is the Lord of hosts, and he will do everything that he promised, and so we know that he's won. But I think the biggest way that we can stop striving is by believing Ephesians 2, verse 8 and 9. For it is by grace you've been saved through faith. This is not of ourselves. It is a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And one of the ways that we can actually be still and know that I am God and stop striving is by thinking that we need to earn our own salvation. For many of us, we struggle that we feel like we aren't enough because we know our failures. One of the reasons why we do confession and assurance every week at Crossway is because we just want to take the stigma away from it. You're right. You don't have life all figured out. We're just going to lame it and lay it out there. And sometimes I don't like those words that I read, quite frankly. They seem a little harsh to me. But we do it because we want to be honest. But we always end with an assurance. And that assurance reminds us that that is true. We aren't as good as we like to think. But God is better than that, and his grace is everything. And that's exactly what we need to rest in. For some of us, we just need to rest in the fact that, you know what? God said it is finished, which meant he paid it in full, and we can't earn our own salvation. And so we don't have to worry about our relationship with God because it is secure, not because of us, but because of Christ and what he's done. But I also want you to see that we can experience everything this thing promises. You know, it's interesting that in the Revelations, the book, the Revelation at the end, it says, I saw a holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from the heaven of God. You know, it's interesting, in Psalm 46, he actually says that the city will not fail. Well, guess what? In 586 BC, Jerusalem was destroyed. Now, it was rebuilt. So we obviously know that that God is going to keep his promises, and it wasn't about the ancient city. It was always about God's presence and his people, and Jerusalem symbolized that. And so in the new heavens, the new earth, he uses that language of the new Jerusalem. And so what he says is, because Christ accomplished what we couldn't, he died in our place, he suffered the consequences of our sin, we can rest. We can rest secure that the most important thing in our life has been dealt with. And that is our sin problem. And because of that, we will get to experience all eternity with God. And we will get to be in his presence in the new heavens, the new earth, where all of the effects of sin and evil, all the chaos of the world will be overtaken. And I want you to notice, though, what appears in Revelation 22, verse 1, that image of a river, a water of life, as clear as a crystal, flowing from the throne of God, and the Lamb down the middle of the great street of the city. And what it says is, what you're going to see when we die and we come into the presence of God, or when Christ comes again and we all get to experience this new heavens and the new earth in its complete form, is the effects of God and his presence will stretch all around us. And all the dryness and the aridness and the chaos of everything is going to be no longer. Because the river of God's presence brings life in it. I also want you to see that Lord Almighty is actually, of Psalm 46, the one that it says not once but twice that we need to bank our lives on, is Jesus. Revelation 19 says that the armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen and white and clean. You want to talk about something, he's going to eradicate evil once and for all. There's going to be a cosmic battle between good and evil, and everything's going to be destroyed, and it's going to be a beautiful thing. And the way that the vision that he has in Revelation is that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords has arrived. And when Christ comes again, all the effects of evil are going to be eradicating. I want you to think about those people in Jerusalem who looked over and saw this destruction happened in place and the joy that it brought them. But I want you to think in your own life, when we pass over, whether we move from death to life to this new life, or when Jesus Christ again, think about just how amazing it's going to be. We are going to say, come and see what the Lord has done. For the Lord has provided us a victory. He has overcome chaos, and he has overcome everything that brought us pain and suffering. And he did it on his own. I also want to go back, though, to that image that we started off with, and a reminder that Jesus is the only anchor that holds. Hebrews 6 says that we have this hope, the anchor for the soul, firm and secure, and it enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain where our forerunner Jesus has entered on our behalf. I want you to see that Jesus is the anchor to the presence of God. That's what the Holy of Holies is. And I want you to say, it is secure and firm. Similar language to refuge and strength. When the storms of life come after us, when circumstances want to make us drift and we wonder if the chaos of this world is going to overcome us, Psalm 46 reminds us that Christ is the anchor that cannot move. He is the thing that will help us navigate through life's storms. We may put our hope in our bank accounts. We may put our hope in our relationships. We may put our hope in our comfort or our success. But the fact of the matter is when life hits hard, those things are attacked and those anchors will drift. But if we bank our life on who God is and what he has done and the hope that that gives us, our storms will still hit us. But Christ is the anchor that will not move, and it will hit and get us through it. Because he is present in our lives, and he is our refuge and our strength. There's one thing I want you to think about doing this week. I probably should have done two, but I'll just give you the first one. It's not in your notes. The first one is think about those times when God has worked in your life, so you can come and see. Write that down. I remember this time where I felt this and I saw God worked. And maybe he didn't work the way that I wanted it to. Maybe it wasn't this great victory, but he worked nonetheless. Remind yourself of that. But also, I want us to live out this passage, this command that God gave us in Psalm 46, verse 10. When we feel the anxiety and the chaos overcoming us, when we feel the weight of what is it that's happening, and we try to just fix it on our own. Maybe I'm the only one who does it because I'm an engineer, but I like to fix everything. Stop it. Stop what you are doing. Own that you're trying to fix it and you're trying to do it on your own strength and your own power. And actually tell yourself what God told you. Be still and know that I am God. Stop and remind yourself. Be still and know that I am God. I am your fortress. I am your refuge. I am your strength. I am the almighty ruler of the universe. And I can get you through this. And focus on who God is, because he's got this. Be still and know that I am God. When our circumstances drift, Christ is the only anchor that cannot move. But he is the immovable anchor because he is the great and mighty one, the Lord of hosts, and he is leading and guiding us. He is present in our life, and he will give us the hope and the strength and the power we need. Our hope is not in ourselves. Our hope is in him alone. Let's pray.
You have just watched a sermon from Crossway Church in Battleground, Washington. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we'd love to have you come join us for a worship service on Sunday at 10 a.m. at 311 North Parkway Avenue in Battleground, Washington. If you'd like to find more information about us online, you can find it at crosswaychurchwa.com.